Watch more programs like this on cable and stream with PCN Select. Subscribe at PCNTV.com. This program has been paid for by the sponsor and does not reflect the views of PCN.
Welcome to another edition of PHRC Speaks, Fair Housing in the 21st Century. I'm your host, Adrian Garcia, Director of the Fair Housing and Commercial Property Division for the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. Now, I got to tell you, I'm blessed to have the opportunity to work with a team of brilliant, passionate professionals that care deeply about the divine assignment that we are called to. My guest today is a great representation of this. Ronnessa Edwards is a native of Philadelphia, and she's been legally married for 6 years to her wife and life partner. That's 16 years, correct?
Yes.
Ronnessa has spent most of her career in human services as a civil servant for the Pennsylvania state government. During her college years, Ronnessa publicly spoke about her experience as a Black lesbian student to classes predominantly white, cisgendered students at the request of a professor. Upon graduating from the University of Pittsburgh at Johnstown, Ronnessa worked as a behavioral specialist for a nonprofit organization and as a youth studies counselor for the City of Philadelphia's Youth Study Center, a detention center for at-risk youth. In these roles, Ronnessa often mentored youth that identified as members of the LGBTQ community. Ronnessa now serves as Human Relations Representative. She's actually a Housing and Compliance Supervisor for the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, where her primary job is to supervise investigators and oversee complaints of discrimination in housing, employment, and public accommodation and education.
Thank you so much. That was an amazing introduction. I appreciate it.
Thank you. So I read in your bio, just to get right into it, that you started in behavioral as a behavioral specialist. I read that just a couple of seconds ago for the City of Philadelphia. So I wanted to ask, what was it about your personal experience that led you to choose some kind of function that just helps people?
Well, I've always been sort of a spokesperson or someone that spoke up for the underdog. Even as a child, I would always make sure that the person getting bullied in class was protected, and even had to speak up for myself. I was one of the only black kids in Catholic elementary school, and I wore cornrows, a traditional African-American hairstyle. And I remember there was one day we were doing a scientific experiment where you would comb your hair and demonstrate static electricity. Well, I couldn't do that. And the teacher actually made fun of me and called me Medusa in front of the class and said something to the effect of my braids being too tight. And I was so embarrassed, everyone laughed, and I stayed quiet because I was also respectful. But then I wrote a letter that night and I gave it to my teacher the next day. And the letter pretty much said, I was very embarrassed by what you said. It is my culture to wear this hairstyle, and I would like an apology. Now I'm a young child, so that didn't go off too well. I ended up getting suspended, and I hid it from my mom because I didn't want to disappoint her until report card came, because she had to sign the report card. And then she read the letter. She thought that I did well for standing up for myself. And she went to the school, spoke with the teacher, and needless to say, the next year that teacher didn't return and my record was clean. So I've always been the person that respectfully spoke up and tried to ensure that other people weren't taken advantage of. Yeah.
Based on your experience as a counselor, corrections counselor, caseworker, and now housing supervisor, what's the one truth that you've learned that transcends all of these roles?
The one truth I would say is that discrimination does not discriminate. Everyone belongs to a protected class, and everyone will eventually belong to the protected classes of age and disability. And there just seems to be, if you do not belong to the cis white male able-bodied population, more than likely you are going to be discriminated against. And as my role as an income maintenance caseworker, youth studies counselor, even corrections counselor, I entered into those professions and into those systems to help the underprivileged and the underrepresented. But I started to sort of see that I was playing a role in the system that was discriminating against them. Because first of all, for them to need those services probably was due to discrimination of some form. Mm-hmm. And, you know, being mandated to be in the correction system, even children, a lot of times discrimination played a part. And I entered into those systems wanting to help, but then was bound by some of the rules, the policies and procedures that inherently have discriminatory practices intertwined in them. And it blew my mind. And I realized that I was limited and my hands were tied. And so thank goodness I was able to come to the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, where I felt like I was on the right side of fighting that discrimination, where I'm a part of a system that is fighting the system that discriminates against those. And so I really had to go through those structures to get to where I'm at today. And I'm so thankful and able to have the perspective of being on both sides of the law.
So what do you think is the toughest part of doing what you do now in this system on this side of it?
The toughest part is still dealing with some of the policies that we have, where I can read a complaint, I can speak with the complainant, I can empathize and understand exactly what they're going through. I can envision it happening, I can speak with the respondent and see that there's something there. Oftentimes, if we don't have the evidence, sometimes they can get away with it. And so now I'm working with trying to get the complainant something, or trying to settle where I know that, but for the paperwork that they might not have, we would be able to prove discrimination. And so it's frustrating when I say, I know what you've gone through, but you might not prevail in this complaint because unfortunately it's not a perfect world and you didn't have copies of what was said, or you didn't have witness statements at the moment, or, you know, the respondent was sophisticated and articulated enough to work around the pretext for the discrimination and to explain that. And so that's probably the most frustrating part of this. But I tell you, when we can dig enough and catch respondent or get that one piece of evidence that shows, aha, I got you here, it's such a wonderful feeling. And it's almost like I have to remember that I'm a neutral party, but I'm calling complainant like, you know, you're going to be all right. Don't worry. You know, you're going to be all right.
And you mentioned something very key in your role, which few people understand, or at least there's a general thought that says, well, if you call the commission, they're always going to be on the complainant's side. And you mentioned earlier that you know that you're neutral. Explain to us and for our listening audience, for a viewing audience, what that means to have that neutral stance.
Well, we represent the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, and we enforce the rules and regulations of the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act. So I say that we're on the side of fighting discrimination, not necessarily representing the complainant or representing the respondent, but finding that evidence to ensure that we can help eradicate discrimination in the state of Pennsylvania. So what that it may not always look like we're on the side of complainant because we're just a gatherer of facts. We find evidence. And if we find that, then that's the side we're on, is that human relations side, that Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, and providing that service to it's not just the complainant and respondent, but helping to eradicate for all citizens in the Commonwealth. And I try to explain it to complainants. Sometimes it doesn't really go through, but we try to stay neutral as far as providing respondent with, you know, information the same way we'll provide complainant, giving complainant a level playing field against respondent. You know, individuals that come to us don't need an attorney because we are finders of fact to find out if the Human Relations Act was violated, not to represent the complainant or the respondent.
And I thank you for explaining that, because I know that I've heard that from people when I was an investigator back many, many moons ago at the Lancaster County Human Relations Commission, well, you guys are always on the side of the complainant. And that's not necessarily true.
Not true.
We're on the side of the law. And those that violate that law find themselves on the opposite side of that law pretty quickly. So one of the things that I mentioned as we started talking were the rights for LGBTQ community. And we have found recently a lot of activity with regards to providing rights to this community.
Yes.
And it, to me, it seems, and I'll digress, but I'll say it seems a little difficult for me to fathom that in 2021, we need laws to tell us how to treat each other. What do you think?
It's interesting to find out that even the laws that are there, we then need to have laws to interpret the law the way it was intended to be written. You know, I was at the Supreme Court of the United States 2019, in fall of 2019, protesting because there were two major employment discrimination cases where the respondent had fired the employee due to their sexual orientation. And it's in the law that they are protected from employment discrimination due to sex. But for some reason, it reached all the way up to the Supreme Court, as if we haven't already established that sexual orientation is a subsect of the protected class of sex. And so why there needs to be an extra review from the Supreme Court, I don't understand, but clearly the law was written to protect us based on our sex. So why are we going through this? And we went through it. Eventually we prevailed. And, you know, I think that people need to stop splitting hairs when it comes to, it's almost like fighting to be able to discriminate. I'm allowed to, because it's my belief that how you're living is wrong, right? But I'm still a human being, and I'm subject to the civil rights. I'm subject to the constitutional rights that I have, and employment rights. And you shouldn't want to look for a reason to discriminate against me because of that. It baffles me.
It baffles the mind. I mean, you know, in 2018, the Human Relations Commission, Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, they put out an interpretation. They put out a guidance, right, that talked about that very thing. It was, listen, you know, based on all this case law that's out there, you know, the discrimination comes about because of the way someone believes someone should behave, or who they should love, or how they should dress. That's the very meaning, definition of prejudice, right? To separate people because of something you don't agree with, and to take adverse action against them. Right. So I thought it was very forward thinking of the PHRC to put out that guidance. And I learned not too long ago, actually, that this has always been their kind of, they did this throughout their history. I mean, in 1961, they put out they amended the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act to cover individuals with disabilities.
Yes. When I started working here, it was October of 2016, and the guidance wasn't formally put out, but I understood that that's how we construed the protected class of sex, is that we included sexual orientation and gender expression, because you're discriminating against a person due to their sex because you believe their sex should behave one way, and that's not okay. Unfortunately, before the guidance was put out in 2017, I was assaulted, and I was punched in my face at a West Indian party because of my sexual orientation. Because after the person punched me in my face, I left the party, but it was said that this dyke bitch deserved what she got. That's what was said. And my family was still in there. They didn't know what was going on, but that was told to me. And I tried to go to the police, and they just wouldn't understand that part of what I experienced was discrimination. And it wasn't a part of even the law to be able to pursue that. And so when the PHRC came out with that guidance, that the protected class of sex includes sexual orientation, I was very proud to be an employee here and to know that although I could not obtain justice for what I went through, that our agency would provide that avenue for others who went through something similar.
You know, sometimes we talk a lot about the individual and making the individual whole, which is absolutely important. But along with that, we struggle because we want to make sure that the complainant is whole, but we are also looking for that public good to ensure that this doesn't happen to the next person. Because if we just put a Band-Aid over it over here, this person is made whole, absolutely, but we've not taken care of that next person, and we're going to come right back to this in the not distant future. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would, absolutely. I think that's the whole point. Oftentimes I ask myself, why would I have to go through something like that? And it is because the people that follow behind me don't have to, that they don't have to suffer, or that they, at least I've done something where where they're now able to obtain justice, or at least have their perspective heard in court. A lot of times, everyone knows about racial discrimination. We know what it looks like. We know the dog whistles. We know these things. But people are becoming more creative in how they're discriminating against folks. And then they're also harping on other protected classes that we have. And it's important that we're able to say to the court system, even though it's not black and white, this is what occurred. This is why it occurred. I know this. I have, you know what I mean? We need to be able to have that avenue. And for the courts to say, you're correct. That is wrong what you went through because of your sexual orientation. And so, I'll be the martyr if I have to, but I'm happy that the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission took a stance and publicly made known that that's how we construe our Human Relations Act.
Let's talk a little bit about housing rights, especially with the LGBTQ community. We've now got an executive order 13988, I think it is. And
yes.
And this executive order basically follows the Bostock case and says that you can't discriminate, because if you discriminate against an individual because of their sexual orientation or gender identity, it is basically a sex discrimination. And we saw most recently that the House just voted on the equality bill where they're trying to move that and actually make it a protected class, right? Yes. So what do you think this is going to mean in terms of housing and employment? Let's face it, you work on both sides of it, but in housing, what do you think this is going to mean in eradicating discrimination against this community?
This is going to be remarkable in fighting for, I instantly think of the LGBTQ children that are out on the street, especially in the streets of Philadelphia. They're so young, and they're out there. Not only are they victim of the system that has them without guardians or without work, but now without housing, and they're not able to obtain that housing because of their sexual orientation or their trans experience or their gender identity or gender expression. This law will be able to help put them in homes that they deserve. Everyone deserves a right to have a place to live, deserves a roof over their head. This law will help in obtaining that. It'll help, the many people who were already discriminated against due to their sexual orientation. It's not just the children, adults. Studies have shown, or I think the statistics show, that the interest rates are higher for those LGBTQ. The denial of home loans are higher for those who belong to the LGBTQ population. And so we have to address this in the front so that we can prevent these systems from denying housing to qualified individuals.
We are at this beginning stage of ensuring protections for this community. But just like back in the 60s, there's a safety issue, a real fear of safety within this community.
Yes.
In housing. In fact, many times, one of the questions that is being asked by someone that identifies as LGBTQ is this place safe? Yes. Because I am LGBTQ, and then next thing you know, here comes a denial, right? Yes. Yes. Have you heard that in your role? Have you heard that from the community in terms of what are the issues that they are afraid of in terms of safety? Because I need people to understand that this goes beyond the discrimination of an individual, but there's a real trauma and safety issue here.
I've had complaints or have investigated complaints where a person of the LGBTQ population was in maybe a shelter or rehabilitation center, and even though they had their own space or their own bunk, they were targeted because of their sexuality. Targeted, whereas sometimes it could be placement of a trans woman into a male only section of a rehab center. It could be the security guard who is bullying a gay male or a gay female and just violating their being, violating their person, and sort of just disrespecting them because of their sexual orientation. It could be someone who prefers a certain set of pronouns, but the staff are not really paying attention, or they purposefully are using pronouns that they are comfortable with for no reason at all. I mean, it doesn't hurt to just identify a person how they wish to be identified. And so, I've seen it. I've seen where, you have a lesbian couple applying for a home loan, and unfortunately they were approved, but then when they went to actually purchase the home, something went through and they can't really explain what it is, but it happened to be after the housing, the bank talked to the people who were selling the house, and it's always mysterious, you know what I mean? So,
yeah.
And those are, again, frustrating moments when it's so hard to pinpoint exactly what happened, but it could be as simple as a conversation of, oh, well, they're a lesbian couple, and then next thing you know, you're not getting the housing. So, I've seen it, unfortunately, in the work that I do.
With all of the most recent, the executive order, there's some murmuring going around. I've talked to a couple of people. There's some murmurings going around about bringing back the Obama administration disparate impact rule, as well as the affirmatively furthering fair housing rule.
Great.
Which is a little bit more robust and a little bit more. But what's important is that disparate impact rule, because therein again, right, we're dealing with individuals that are being impacted by a certain law. And so what do you believe will be the ramifications of being able to kind of walk back what was most recently done by the Trump administration, right? Not to get too heavy on it, but to be able to walk that back and get back to common sense, fair housing rules and disparate impact rules?
I think it would be a tremendous impact to go back to acknowledging affirmatively furthering fair housing and the disparate impact rule. I think that the removal of those rules during the Trump administration, I don't understand how that was even able to be accomplished, aside from the fact of who was in the presidential seat. But I won't go into that. I think it's important to make it known that that was a mistake, that should not have happened, and that we are going to acknowledge and go after or try to resolve and rectify policies that desperately impact those of the LGBTQ community, whether the policy is neutral on its face or not. We need to, it's not enough to have good intentions. We need to look at exactly how it's impacting people, and we need to fix that. And so we can't say, oh, well, it wasn't written to do this destruction, but it is doing the destruction. Let's move forward and fix that and continue to move forward, because we should be, especially government, should not be trying to hold back its citizens. We should be helping the citizens to be self-sufficient, to attain housing, employment, these things, to be able to enjoy their life, to be able to benefit from the civil rights that the constitutional rights and civil rights that we do have, and I think I just don't understand sometimes how government gets in its own way and violates its own rights. I really don't understand that.
Now that we're getting all this executive order and so on and so forth, and obviously there's going to be an opportunity for us to provide training regarding this subject matter. What are some of the things that, if you could put into place, right, you would like to see agency-wide, as far as moving us forward and making sure that we're doing some intuitive, real training regarding this subject?
Well, I do think, Adrian, that we're doing a great job in our community outreach and reaching some of the like municipalities. I know we do training in the York School District, or we've done training in the York School District. We doing training in Philadelphia and Harrisburg. What I would like for our agency to penetrate are the systems, the police systems. I would like to see us penetrate the housing systems. When a person buys a home to be able to rent out, I would like our agency to be there when they get their landlord accreditation. If that's even a thing, maybe we can implement that they have landlord accreditation. I would like to see us in there. I would like us to talk to the banks when it comes to approving loans. I want to see us in every major system, because I think that's where we need to hit our markets. It's beneficial to speak to our neighbors and all come together and reach across the table and get that understanding. But it's so important that we change some of the systemic racism and systemic discrimination that is ingrained in these laws. That's where I think our attention needs to be. We need to go to the school systems. We need to talk about what's being taught in the schools. I could just keep going. I think that's where our agency needs to, yes, we do need to be a resource for the public and for the individual citizens, but I would like to see more commission initiated complaints against some of these systems so that we can break that down and rebuild them. Because one thing, and I'm going to end on this, a lot of times they say the system is broken, but in my opinion, the system is doing what it was intended to do, and that's the issue. The system was intended to keep certain people as second-rate citizens, and that's what we need to break down, because that's no longer acceptable. And so we need to help uplift those who are not benefiting currently from the system, which, like I said in the beginning, are cis, white, male, able-bodied individuals. We need to uplift everyone so that we're all benefiting and we're all getting the privilege that is in these systems that we confront and that we deal with daily, from education as a child all the way up to employment, to owning a home, getting a car, loans, small business loans. Everything. So,
folks, she was just getting started.
I was.
She was just getting warmed up.
I was.
Ronnessa, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Adrian, for having me and for providing this platform for us to have this voice and to reach the people. And I love the work that you're doing. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Well, folks, discrimination against the LGBTQ community is every bit as pervasive as any other protected class you can imagine. According to the Williams Institute at UCLA Law School, 9.5 million adults identify as LGBTQ. 3 complaints of sexual orientation, gender identity discrimination in housing are filed for every 100,000 LGBTQ adults each year. Yet only 22 states prohibit discrimination against this community. Maybe that's why the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission unveiled the guidance for protecting sexual orientation and gender identity 2 years ago. And maybe that's why the Supreme Court in Bostock versus Clayton held that employers who take adverse action against individuals merely for being gay or transgender violate Title VII. And more recently, the Pennsylvania housing, the U.S. Housing and Urban Development used that Bostock decision to expand protections for individuals that identify as LGBTQ against discrimination in housing. And all this to remind us how we need to treat each other as human beings. We can all agree that we have an obligation to treat each other with dignity and respect, and that discrimination is the de-evolution of who we want to be as a society. That is why when I refer to PHRC Speaks as fair housing in the 21st century, it's because we build on the historical successes of the past while being vigilant in the present and looking to address the ever-changing civil rights issues in housing. For more information, or if you believe you've been a victim of discrimination in housing, visit us online at www.phrc.pa.gov or call us at 717-787-9780. That's going to do it for this edition of PHRC Speaks. Until next time, take care, be good, and be fair to each other.
This program has been paid for by the sponsor and does not reflect the views of PCN. To get your program on PCN Fusion and for more information, contact info@pcntv.com.